Hello friends, today we'll be talking about a trine between Mercury in Scorpio and Saturn in Pisces. And I want to begin like this. Every so often, the mind enters a moment of clarity that feels different from ordinary clarity. Not louder, not brighter, just unmistakably true. This trine is one of those moments. And this is the last piece of intelligence forming through the water cycle. And with it, it carries the insight and understanding we've been moving towards for the past several months. And this is precisely the kind of clarity we need because it's going to become the bridge between the water we're clearing now and the era of air and fire that we're about to enter very soon. And I just want you to know that this Saturn business is not done because it's going to receive a square very soon, this month of December, from both Mars and later on from the Sun. And those videos will be coming soon. So if you haven't subscribed, please do so YouTube will notify you when those videos are uploaded. Now, let's get into what this trine means. And let's start here. Sometimes we have these moments where our minds stop drifting. When it stops circling the same emotional material, the ones that we've been combing through for weeks, months, or even years, and suddenly everything becomes clear. This trine is one of those moments. And let us remember, considering Mercury's retrograde, Mercury has been moving through Scorpio for quite a while now, to be exact, since October 6th. And if you think about it, Mercury has been having a dialogue with virtually every planet. As Mercury entered Scorpio, if you remember, it traveled along with Mars for quite a while, all the way up to when they both got into Sagittarius. Mercury also had a cazimi with the Sun in the sign of Scorpio, and it finally touched Venus in its retrograde motion at 22 degrees of Scorpio. And through all of these meetings with different planets in Scorpio, it was constantly formulating that grand trine with Saturn and Jupiter. But Mercury's finally alone at the bottom of the well while moving direct this time. So this moment holds a particular kind of clarity. And this clarity is coming because Mercury has had a dialogue, basically brainstorming with every planet. And this is to say that Mercury within us, our intellect, our thinking process, had a lot to chew on and digest. And what we can conclude from this now is that Mercury is no longer guessing. It's not interpreting through noise. It's not grasping or overreaching anymore. It's coming to its clarity. And as our depth of understanding forms, Saturn in that very moment is at 25 degrees of Pisces, now direct. And it's opening a perfect trine to Mercury. So with this trine, everything is actually supposed to crystallize now. And that's because when Mercury and Saturn have a dialogue from one water sign to another, the mind becomes something rare. It becomes emotionally intelligent in a rational way and rationally intelligent in an emotional way. And that means that during this time, we can come to articulate, to understand, and to articulate the complicated language of emotions. Because we feel emotions, a lot of times, we can't really describe them, explain them. Why are we having them in this moment? We're getting clarity. So let's follow this line of analysis and see what else this trine is bringing. And to do that, let's just very briefly touch on what Mercury does or what Mercury is like in Scorpio. And then Saturn in Pisces, then we'll understand why this is coming about. So firstly, when we have Mercury in the sign of Scorpio, in a sign that is very deep, the intellect tends to move inwards. And I say the intellect because Mercury represents the intellect. It's about perception penetrating beneath the surface. It doesn't skim things. For instance, it listens to the emotional logic beneath people's words. It recognizes patterns in a very deep way, and it understands intent and motive without someone needing to articulate them. So this is a mind that doesn't trust the surface. And to say Mercury has gone to the depth, it's also indicating that we have gone to the depth of our own psychological currents, undercurrents. We've been touching base with our instincts, with our fears, our hidden motives and intentions, generally to the hidden material beneath everything else that we don't have access to it every day. But now in its direct motion, Mercury is starting to rise with a greater amount of clarity. And no, it's not dramatic or loud. It's the kind that feels like a clean line being drawn across something that has been foggy for way too long. And it's this kind of Mercury that is starting to have a dialogue with Saturn in Pisces. And it's very important to remember, this Saturn is also not in its retrograde motion because when Mercury was having all those previous dialogues, Saturn was in its retrograde, but Saturn's direct now. Saturn is now deciding what stays and what goes, what needs to dissolve. And I talked about that extensively in the last video. about Saturn going direct. I'll put the link to that video in the description box below. And very briefly, what we can say about the Saturn in Pisces right now is that when Saturn's in Pisces in general, we're talking about Saturn's sense of realism, because Saturn represents reality, operating inside a field, Pisces, which is all about incorporation. So Saturn's discipline is being applied to the material of Pisces. So when Saturn and Mercury begin their dialogue in these water signs, something very useful happens. And that is, we're able to do something that human beings have a very hard time doing in general. And that is to say, water becomes rationally articulate. And water, the other word for it here is emotions become rationally articulate. And we generally think that rationality and emotionality are two different things. But imagine that they could actually understand each other. They can complement each other. That's what this trine is trying to do. So that means emotions become readable, memories start to become coherent. And this is so important if you have experienced anything like trauma. Trauma is when that event that happened doesn't fit into the whole narrative. We need coherency. So this trine is very helpful. And intuition can become logical. Perception becomes precise. Depth can become structured. And even the unconscious aspects of ourselves can become intelligible. So we're talking about a very rare kind of psychological cooperation and the type of coherence that only a water trine with these two planets can create. Literally, we need Saturn and Mercury as a trine in water signs to have this kind of a situation. And that means the rational mind can move through the emotional field without drowning in it, without spiraling in it, without projecting, and without collapsing into passivity or sentimentality. So this is our mind seeing clearly inside our depth and inside other people's depth. And I really want you to take note. This is why this video is important, because this is the last time we get this kind of clarity inside water. Because from spring onwards and for a long time, we are shifting into air and fire dominant signs. So this water trine right now is saying, understand what your inner content is made of. Because after this, we're moving on. You won't have so many opportunities to sit there and reflect and then to think and then to feel your thoughts. Things are going to change. And before going further, I actually want to propose some questions that we can use as self-inventory. Because this trine is forcing us right now to see our emotional patterns. It's forcing us to see our depth, the depth of other people. We're trying to understand what's true and what's not. And it wants us to see all of this without distortion. And I wanted to pose these questions because even though we've been wanting emotional clarity, clarity has been the very thing a lot of us have been avoiding, because clarity shows us the truth and it's uncomfortable. It's often uncomfortable. A lot of times to see the truth is to see our real self and the real self of other people. And that will change the entire dynamic and the way that we act and behave. So during this time, I suggest that it's good for us to pay attention, for us to ask questions such as, when truth rises from the depth, what do I do with it? What's my first instinctual response? Where does it come from? What's triggering it? It's good for us to know by asking ourselves, am I acting from a place of fear? Am I instinctually trying to fix something? Because some people are fix-it people. Am I trying to avoid it? I just want us to pay attention during this time, because the clarity that is meant to come out of this is very important for us to understand ourselves and people around us. And I'm also bringing this forward because even though when we have trines, you can have darker experiences in life. I don't know if you've ever experienced that. Everyone's talking about this beautiful, giant, grand trine, and everything's supposed to be just lovely and going well. And then you're sitting in your life, you're like, am I cursed? Because this is anything but a trine. But the trine is holding a sense of coherence for the expression and articulation of something. If we haven't worked through things, what do you think is going to be contained in this trine? It's going to be the darker aspects, but it's also our blessing because now we get to see them. But I just want us to pay attention to kinds of things that could emerge. For one, we might start to see hyperanalysis of emotions. And that's because Mercury penetrates very deeply in the sign of Scorpio. And Saturn, on the other hand, is constricting and restricting. So the result of this can be emotions that are just being dissected. And when that happens, nothing really feels natural anymore. It's as if we're looking at our feelings the way a scientist looks at a specimen under a microscope. And when we do this, we lose that living pulse underneath our emotions, which has its own intelligence. In a sense, we're being fragmented through this kind of harsh analysis. And our job right now is to actually create coherence. So that's one shadow to be aware of. The next one could be very much related to feeling cold towards vulnerable emotions. Because Saturn in Pisces can very much detach us from our emotional field. And Mercury has this neutrality. It's unbiased, so it can become indifferent. It also has detached feelings. So together, they can create distance, as if our inner world is something to be studied from a distance as an observer who's not involved, rather than being in it and viscerally feeling it. And in this moment, we are supposed to be intimately involved to understand what our inner landscape is about. We're talking about a water sign, 2 of them. 3 of them, because Jupiter's are 2, but we'll talk about that in a minute. The third shadow is a kind of a fixation that's disguised as logic. And we know Scorpio can fixate on things, and Saturn can hold, so it hardens that fixation. And Mercury can articulate them so convincingly that the mind begins to believe its own fixation and what it's saying. And what is the mind believing? Its fears, its anxieties, its limitations, and all kinds of other negative feelings. This fixation can make them feel like this is a fact, this is a constant, and this is true. So we need to be careful about that, because one of the things this does is create rumination. So we're just now looping. We're fixated on something and we're just short-circuiting around a thought. This is not a good way to problem solve. So that's another shadow. Another shadow is that we can take too much of other people's emotional field. And this is because Pisces in general loves to dissolve boundaries. And then Scorpio absorbs the depth. Here, Mercury's interpreting and Saturn's doing a critical analysis of everyone's emotions and what's happening to everybody. So you can find yourself suddenly being a mediator, middle of other people's upheaval. You can find yourself having your nervous system attached to theirs. They're having all these up and downs, and you're like, I actually don't have any up and downs in my life, but I'm just going up and down with these people. What's happening? We have to realize that we're carrying other people's things, and this could be part of our pattern. Half the battle in life and having self-autonomy is to know where you begin and end, is to be the sovereign of your own nervous system, know when to go in to act as a mediator and when it is not our job to do it. So if we find ourselves in these kinds of patterns again, it's being brought forth so that we see it, but they are the shadows that we're negotiating with. And the last shadow is that truth can become too sharp. And that's because Scorpio loves to strip everything down to its deepest layer. And it does this defiantly and harshly. And on the other hand, Saturn's dissolving all of our illusions. And Saturn is in full force of prompting realism, be realistic, what's real, detaching us from all kinds of our magical thinking right now. So what this means, even though it's good that we're trying to arrive to some sort of a truth, but when truth arrives too quickly, too suddenly, and too bare, it comes without cushioning. It's too sharp. And we can come out at other people that way. Other people can come at us in that way right now. And that's something to be mindful about. How are we articulating our truth? Wait a minute, maybe what this person's saying is true, but why are they delivering it in that way? These are all shadows. In general, clarity can become sharper than we expect. But please remember, and I'll say it again, the shadows are meant to show us exactly what we're meant to learn. Because when this water trine closes, our attention is going to be drawn to different ways of being. So in this last section of the video, let's turn to some of the lessons themselves. And the first lesson is that our emotional truth has to become coherent. And if you think about it, we have Jupiter in Cancer right now. So it's showing us our deepest emotional roots. It's showing us what our internal wiring and configuration is about. And then we had Scorpio, right, through this entire time, which was showing us the depth of things, the depth of ourselves. And we had Pisces, which was constantly showing us what we need to surrender and now Mercury and Saturn are asking us to understand this entire process rationally. Saturn and Mercury conjunct, for example, or through aspects is indicating intelligence, a kind of a scientific, rational intelligence. We're being asked right now, understand the emotional work that you've done. What have you learned? What does it all mean? Feel it, but actually rationally think through it. And the second lesson is emotions and intuitions have to become grounded, especially before moving into an era that's dominated by ideas and actions, that fire and air quality again. So we need to understand the logic of our emotion, intuition, because we cannot enter that air and fire era without understanding why we feel the way we feel. We need to understand our pattern recognition, what becomes salient to us suddenly. In general, the software in the background that's operating, we need to understand this, because imagine this, you have an emotion, you ignite into an action. But if you don't understand that emotion and you need to change the trajectory of that action because it harms you, then you don't know how. And life is going to place us in kind of a situation where it's that we don't have this time to sit, feel, reflect the way that we have been. We have to start navigating our way through ideas and actions. So this is a prime time to actually understand our inner landscape, and this Mercury is very much setting this into motion. And the lesson here is that water can't carry us forward anymore. I mean, it's been several months of emotional processing. All kinds of unconscious material has been rising to the surface. It's been months of exposure and dissolution. But this is the last moment where we are meant to think through emotions. After this, the path is going to start moving upwards and outwards into communication and the movement through action. And if you're in doubt, check out the way Aquarius is inaugurating everything. And then shortly after that, Neptune and Saturn are both going to leave Pisces into a fire sign, Aries. And by spring, Uranus is going to go back into Gemini. We already have Pluto in an air sign in Aquarius. Jupiter is going to go into a fire sign, Leo. And by summer, Rahu is moving into an air sign and Ketu into fire. So as you can see, this moment's coming to its conclusion, but we need to have clarity and realizations. And the final lesson is that emotional coherence is what prepares the mind for the new beginnings. Without coherence here, the air and fire cycle that will be starting, they will start with distortion. But if we have coherence, then we can start with a sense of precision. And right now, all of this is occurring in waters of Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. And we can call all of this emotional attainment for what is ahead. So this year and last year were very much about working through our emotions. And I don't know, do you guys remember that debilitated Mars in the sign of Cancer? It's just been ongoing. And these water signs had a purpose. As Cancer is holding the origin of our memory and internal wiring, Scorpio is holding the depth, and Pisces holds the key for release, which is through incorporation. Together, they're forming a circuit where our internal world has been churning so that we eventually arrive at our emotional truth. And just to briefly touch on the role of Jupiter in this trine between Mercury and Saturn, Jupiter in Cancer, which is exalted and in its retrograde motion, so it's super intense, is the quiet support of this entire moment. It's expanding our emotional truth just enough to give meaning to this clarity that is trying to emerge forth right now. It's giving us a moral and ethical orientation. It's giving care behind the realism that Saturn's bringing. It's giving belonging behind the articulations of Mercury. Jupiter is the silent reason why any of this clarity matters at all. And in this moment, our depth is supposed to be understood and not just felt. It's the last moment where emotions become fully articulated before the energy shifts into something completely new. And if the content of this video was of value to you, please remember to like, share, and comment. And I was blown away by your reflections in that Saturn Direct video. Thank you for sharing your stories and your experiences with me and with each other. That was incredible just to watch how many people are having experiences that actually fit inside of this frame, but in so many different ways, so many iteration of it. I've learned a lot. And let me know how the emotions are emerging right now and how you're navigating your way through it. I want to know how you are and how you're experiencing all of this. And if you want to jump deeper into your own birth chart to figure out the blueprint that's been designated to you, understand its limitations and above all, its potential, you can go to the email in the description box below or to parisayazi.com for more information there. And if this transit has given you clarity, hold it gently is the last bit of emotional truth that you need. And that is before the sky shifts into the next era, which is all about air and fire. And I'll leave you with this. May this understanding anchor itself so deeply that nothing in the coming months can shake what you now know. That's it for today. Sending you much love. Till next time.